I am Jasmine Noel, Senior Product Marketing Manager. I've been at ReversingLabs for almost 4 years. Time really does fly. I'm covering software supply chain security market. Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. So Dave Ferguson, I'm a Director of Technical Product Management here at reversingLabs. I've been on board almost 2 years now. But over the last 20 years, I've had a lot of variety of roles, all in application security. And prior to that, I was a developer, building web apps and that sort of thing. So I'm excited to present this to you today. Thanks for joining the webinar.
Okay, great. So what are we going to talk about today? The challenges, seeing and stopping software supply chain attacks within your CI/CD pipelines. We're going to talk a little bit about how binary analysis can simplify that integration and give you the visibility you need to, build and deliver safe software, while hopefully minimizing pipeline disruptions. Okay. So if you look at the most crippling supply chain attacks we've had, the SolarWinds, 3CXs of the world, those impacted thousands of customers. But the malware and the malicious changes that were made to that software weren't simply due to open source and vulnerabilities, right? They were not detected by their classic application security and SCA testing tools, right? And literally after the attack, SolarWinds just went around to everybody and said, well, show me how you could have detected this. And at the time, ReversingLabs was the only one that actually had a story there and actually could do it. Because at this point, in those late stage attacks, you're dealing with build outputs, binaries, artifacts, releases. So it follows that what you need to do is analyze those outputs, those binaries in your pipeline to check for these type of attacks, right? Now, the problem is the world is not as simple as this, one pipeline diagram, right? For most large enterprises, if I can somehow get to the next slide, there we go. We're talking about hundreds of teams, right? Many of them are going to be using completely different tooling. They're going to have some very complex build automation going on there. So basically, the more complex this picture becomes, the more painful it gets to actually integrate your security testing directly into those CI/CD tooling, right? And guess what? That causes friction and developers pushback. So this is where we think this binary repository management comes into play. So Dave, what type of binaries actually get stored in a solution like Artifactory?
Yeah, so Artifactory is really one of the leading binary repository management tools out there. And what it's used for, it's used in a couple of different ways. It tends to be the spot to where developers are in their pipelines are delivering that build artifact. So whatever comes out of that pipeline oftentimes goes into Artifactory. Maybe it's a staging point for QA to pick it up and do testing, or maybe it's a staging point for release. Maybe it's a release candidate that's going to go to customers. So that's kind of primary use case number one is build artifacts, storing build artifacts. Number two would be it's also a source for developers to pull in their open source libraries or other third-party components. Instead of developers pulling those in from the internet directly, which is dangerous, having those third-party libraries, those open source components in Artifactory, and then developers pull from there, either locally or their pipelines, or pulling those components in from Artifactory. So that's kind of the two main use cases of Artifactory. It does tend to end up being kind of a dumping ground for a lot of stuff. So it has multiple uses beyond those two use cases, but I think those two are the primary what we see out there.
Okay. So with all those binaries in kind of like one logical place, I mean, that's perfect for match for Spectra Assure, right? Because that's what we do. We analyze binaries. So connecting Spectra Assure to Artifactory means you can scan artifacts, from all those multiple pipelines, regardless of what people are using to build or which third-party source you're using to pull into the local repository. We can scan early in the life cycle, potentially blocking access to unsafe packages. We can also scan your entire release package, looking for those late stage attacks and to ensure that customers remain safe. So what are we looking for? When we deconstruct a binary, and it could be a script or a build artifact, open source, third-party components, we actually can identify thousands of different types of files. We do that without accessing the source code and produce a very comprehensive SBOM. And we actually list out all the other artifacts that we find. And we find both immediate threats, your malware, your tampering, suspicious behavior changes that are just not supposed to be there. We also find things that are just risky, your exposed secrets, your vulnerabilities, that sort of thing. Now, we take all of those threats that we find and we map them to each item in the SBOM or the artifact there we found them. So what ends up happening is exactly what the threat is, what the risk is, and where it is in the software. Okay, and that gives us a great way to kind of integrate with the a larger pipeline, right? So to start, you can go to our Spectra Assure community. It's a free resource to help folks choose secure open source packages. We also can do the same thing with your dependencies from anything from the commercial stuff that you get from Microsoft or Docker, or maybe you are having some dependencies developed by a contractor or your partners. These tend to be delivered as binaries, so your code analysis is not going to help you with that. But we can, right? We will scan binaries and tell you the threats and the risks embedded in all those components. Okay. And then you get into the actual builds, right? You're going to build for functional testing, see if everything's working as you thought. So literally at the same time, Spectra Assure can analyze those binaries to tell you if there's some risk in there. And then there's a final step, which is actually, packaging the whole software together for release, whether it's, into a big container that's going to get deployed in your production environment, or so it's a package that's going to get released to a customer, right? That point's where a ton of artifacts get pulled in, which people don't tend to think about, your installation helpers, compressed data files, documentation help, videos, images. All those things actually need to be checked for risks as well. And we are fast. You can unpack files as big as, 50 megabytes, and sometimes as fast as 1 gig in a few minutes. So you're not talking about days for us to do this, right? It's under an hour, well, sometimes. But you don't have to believe me. You can check out all our customer videos and our case studies on our website and what they're saying. What I like about these particular quotes is that they're saying, only Spectra Assure will stop a release. We are that critical checkpoint. And they say these things because we're really the best at finding things like malware and tampering. And those must be addressed before taking the next step, right? Because those are the attacks that are actually going to get your customers breached, right? So let's take a little look at this integration. So Dave, I see here it says it's natively integrated. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so the integration we built with Artifactory it's native in that it's taking advantage of the Artifactory REST APIs. So we didn't build anything separate from that. It's simply using the public APIs published by JFrog for Artifactory. In addition to that, another piece of the integration is a plugin, again, using the native framework provided by JFrog for Artifactory. So the integration is entirely built on those public interfaces that JFrog provides.
Awesome. So once you've plugged Spectra Assure into Artifactory, what we're basically doing is you tell us what repositories you want us to monitor, what policies you want to apply, and we'll look around what packages haven't been scanned and then scan them, right? And then we will let you know if something malicious has been done to them or not. Hopefully, for the most part, we're not going to find something terribly malicious in there, and you can just march on through and go to the next step. But in those cases where we do find something, you can actually set blocking policies, right? So you can say, let's block access to any unsafe or vulnerable packages, right? And you can do that. We will, put that little tag in the JFrog metadata itself saying this is unsafe. So the next time your pipeline or your developers tries accessing it, you can't. Another thing that we do is that we give you the ability to securely share that report that we've built. And this is particularly useful when you're dealing with someone, a third party who's built the component that has a problem. You can share out the report, you can start collaborating on what remediations are going to happen, or whether they're going to be able to fix it in what type of time frame, and that sort of thing. Right? So I mentioned that tailoring the policies. Now, we think that this is one of the key aspects of being able to have your security and your speed at the same time, right? Because you can have different blocking policies for different types of repo. So think about it. When you're early in that life cycle, you want to be finding those critical vulnerabilities, things that you think folks must fix, right? So your open source or the components that people are building for you, you want to check those against those type of risks and get them fixed early in the pipeline, right? Whereas when you think about later the pipeline, you don't want any random vulnerability, halting your release cycle, right? You want to stop attacks that can get your customers breached. So that's what you're kind of looking at, your malware and tampering. And what we also have to help people get started faster, we have some out-of-the-box policies that we call safe levels. So you can choose your level and just go from there. And then as you get more and more familiar, you can tailor those levels for yourself. Okay. All right, so how it works. Dave, I'm going to turn this over to you.
All right, thanks, Jasmine. So yeah, let's get into the kind of the nitty gritty of how the integration works. By the way, the integration is available for any Spectra Assure customer. There's no extra cost or anything like that. Any customer can use this. It's just a better, more elegant way to operationalize it if you happen to be an Artifactory customer as well as a Spectra Assure customer. So what you see here on the left is a self-hosted Artifactory server. So the integration currently is not working with a JFrog hosted version of Artifactory, but as long as it's a self-hosted version, the integration works. And so we have an instance of Artifactory on the left here. And then on the right, we have a worker machine. And essentially that's where the integration is going to run. And the integration takes the form, there's two pieces to the integration. One is called RL Scan Artifactory, and that's a Python package available on the PyPI registry. The second piece is a plugin called RL Block Plugin, which you see on the left running as part of Artifactory. So in other words, it's running in process with Artifactory. So those are really the two pieces to it. And so what I'm showing here is scanning with the Spectra Assure CLI. So you see that on the worker machine. And let me go through the 3 steps of how this works. So in step 1, you see in the middle where essentially you launch the script, which is a Python package, and that you target specific repos in Artifactory, and you say, I want to scan everything in these repos. And so in step 1, the script reaches out via the REST APIs, Artifactory APIs, downloads the artifacts that are in that repo that need to be scanned locally. And then the script in step 2 that you see on the worker machine is actually launching the scan against that artifact, right? And it's using the Spectra Assure CLI to do that. So in this case, scans are occurring locally in the customer environment. The artifacts are never leaving the customer environment in this case, right? Now there still is during the scan some communication to ReversingLabs, lookups of hashes and that sort of thing for threat intelligence information. But that is, the artifacts are not being sent to ReversingLabs in this case. Once the scan has finished, the script checks the scan status. Did it pass or fail the policy that was configured? And then based on that, in step 3, it sets metadata properties on the artifact within Artifactory. And at the same time, it's going to upload reports, the Spectra Assure reports, whichever ones have been specified, as well as SBOMs, like a Cyclone DX SBOM. upload those into Artifactory itself. So you have properties set on the artifact, you have the scan reports available in Artifactory, and when all the artifacts in the repo have been scanned, the script finishes. And at that point, you have all your artifacts scanned in the repo of interest. And then if you see on the left side here, what that represents, the big X is representing the plugin, our RL block plugin, blocking access to any artifacts that have failed the Spectra Assure scan, right? So this is essentially like a kill switch for stopping the spread of unsafe or dangerous artifacts. You know, whether those artifacts are open source libraries with very severe vulnerabilities, or whether it's a release package that has where we found malware, whatever the case is, the plugin will block access and download of that artifact. And so you're simply protecting your organization and potentially your customers with that plugin. So that's at a high level, kind of the nuts and bolts of how the integration works when you're scanning with the CLI. There should be another slide, Jasmine, that reflects the portal scanning. Oh no, okay, we don't have that one in. That's fine. So there's another very similar diagram that scans with the portal. So yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. So essentially, the only difference with the portal scanning is that in this case, the portal scanning occurs in the Spectra Assure SaaS-based portal. So in other words, that case, the artifact is sent to ReversingLabs. So the artifact is leaving the customer environment and the scans happen on the ReversingLabs side. Other than that, it's essentially the same integration. But in the demo, you'll see both. So you'll be able to see that more clearly. So, and with that, let me move on and share my screen and we'll get into the demos. Let me know if you can see my screen, Jasmine.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so you're seeing the Artifactory login screen, but first let me talk about the demos I'm going to do. So I'm excited today because I've prepared 3 separate demos. One is showing is going to illustrate sort of the final build exam that Jasmine had shown earlier, where prior to a release, ReversingLabs should be that last check, that final build exam before you send it out to customers or you deploy it. So that's demo number 1. Demo number 2 is going to be more of a third-party risk management or a TPRM use case. So initially, when we built this integration, we assumed that only software producers would be interested in this integration. Well, it turns out we've been talking to some potential customers that they're using Artifactory, but it's more of a software consumer use case or an enterprise buyer use case where the organization wants to bring software into their environment and they want to deploy it, but they want to make sure it's safe first and it's not going to cause any issues. And so in that case, I have a demo for that third-party risk management situation. And then the final demo is going to be more of a shift left. So in other words, a CI/CD pipeline, developers are building their application, bringing in open source components from Artifactory. However, Spectra Assure has detected some problems with the open source library and is blocking access to some of them, and that's going to fail the build. So essentially, you're catching problems early before you're actually releasing. So we're going to go through all 3 of those today, and hopefully we have enough time. All right, so let me go ahead and log in. This is our test instance of Artifactory here at ReversingLabs. So let me log in. And I'm actually going to turn off my camera. The reason being is my machine tends to slow down. So I need all the help I can get in terms of processing power. Okay, so I've logged into Artifactory here. And what I want to point out is this repository called Docker Local. And so essentially what we have here is a repo for receiving Docker images, container images from a CI/CD pipeline. And if we look at the CI/CD builds folder, and we see a Java Hello World container image, build number 41 was scanned most recently. And so I want to point out the properties that have been set on this Docker image. So essentially the properties that the integration has set all begin with RL. So you know that's from the integration. And so we see that this Docker image has been scanned. The scan status is pass. So there was no problems identified and to cause a failure of the scan. And so what I want to do now is hop over to Jenkins. So I'm going to actually run a Jenkins build here to build this container image. And so we're gonna do build number 42. The last one I did was 41. And then after we do that, we're gonna scan it with the integration using Portal. So before I do that, I wanted to actually show you the Spectra Assure portal. And when we launch the scan, the new scan will show up here. And I have 3 Docker images that have been scanned. This is the one that we're going to actually look at. So here's that build 41. You can see that there were no issues that caused the failure. So we got a green pass here. We didn't find any vulnerabilities. We didn't find any malware or tampering. We found some kind of medium severity issues with hardening, secrets, and licensing, but nothing that failed the policy. Now, let's take a look at the container image to Artifactory Jenkins project. All right. And so before I launch the build, I wanted to show the Jenkins file that's actually essentially our pipeline script that actually going to run the build. And I have that here in my GitHub repo called container Java hello world. And this is publicly available on GitHub if anybody wants to look at it. So my Jenkins file, this is my pipeline script. Let's take a look at that real quick. So what the script does is just essentially do a build, which is using the Docker file. So we're building the container image in this stage here. And then the second stage is using the JFrog CLI, we're going to push that image into Artifactory. All right, so pretty simple, very straightforward. Let's go ahead and look now at, go back to here, and let's go ahead now and look at our Docker file. The Docker file is the instructions to build the container image. And I'm going to make a change here. I'm going to simulate an attack, a supply chain attack. And I'm going to, this is not very stealthy of me, but it would, imagine this is done surreptitiously and nobody catches it. Essentially what I'm doing is adding a known piece of Java malware. It's called Strat, which is a remote access Trojan built in Java. And I'm essentially adding that to the container image here by uncommenting this line. So let me commit those changes. And now we're going to go back and we're going to build that container image with the Jenkins. And so, oops, we have 2 builds running. Interestingly enough, I must have clicked to build twice. Let's see what the status looks like. All right, so we're pushing that image to Artifactory. And when that finishes, looks like build 43 failed, probably because I launched them at the same time. Build 42 should end up pushing, we should see that show up here in our Artifactory. Okay, it's done. Let me refresh this. All right, so we've got build 42. Now, what I want to do is use our integration to scan that Docker image with Portal. And so here I have a PowerShell window open. I've already installed RL Scan Artifactory. That's the PyPI package that I mentioned earlier. If you wanted to see what that looked like, it's out here on PyPI. You can install it using pip. And now once you've set up some environment variables, you're ready to run the scan. So what I'm doing here is launching the scan against that Docker local Artifactory repo that I showed. And I'm saying use scan it with Portal. And I have ignore cert errors because we have a self-signed cert on our Artifactory server. So I need that. So let me go ahead and launch that. And the integration immediately reaches out to Artifactory and it sees, well, it's already scanned 41, so it skipped it. It knows 41 build has already been scanned, so it skips that, and now it's scanning build 42. So that's going to take just a few minutes to run. And eventually over here in Portal, we'll see build 42 show up and the scan will begin. But while that runs, yeah, I'm gonna switch gears and I'm gonna talk about that second use case, which is the third-party risk management use case. And we'll come back to this this first use case where we're scanning the container image. All right, so back in Artifactory, we have a repo here called vendor binaries. So imagine some people you're in security, someone at your organization wants to run a couple of utilities, and you've gotten a request. They want to run they want to run HXD, which is a hex editor Windows utility, and they want to run PuTTY, which is an SSH client for Windows. Now, as a security person, you want to let them run these utilities, but you don't know if they're safe. What if there's something malicious in it, something dangerous? So what can be done in this scenario is you can add these binaries to Artifactory, and I've done that here. I have the installer for HXD here, and I have the installer for PuTTY here. And these are Windows executables. And I could simply launch a scan using, again, the Artifactory integration, and in this case, scanning it with the CLI. And this is what the command looks like. So again, you're targeting the vendor binaries library this time. But in this case, we're going to scan it with the CLI. So those binaries will not leave your environment. It'll simply remain and will be scanned with the CLI. And when you scan with the CLI, the integration asks for a couple of additional options on the command line, including the path to where's the CLI store located, the package store, and also the path to the actual RL Secure executable. RL Secure is the Spectra Assure CLI. That's what we call it. And I've also specified a couple of other options saying I want to generate the HTML report from Spectra Assure, and I want to generate the Cyclone DX SBOM. Right now, I'm not going to actually launch that scan here because I've already scanned those artifacts. And if we go back into Artifactory and take a look at these, let's look at the first one, HXD. We see properties, so we know we've already scanned it. And what we hear, the most important property here is scan status fail, right? So we know there's something wrong, something unsafe about this particular utility. And let's take a look at PuTTY. And we scanned it as well. However, we got a scan status of pass. And notice in each case, we have a link to the scan report right here in the properties as well. And so if we take a look at those, I have those actually open right here. Here's the report. This is the Spectra Assure safe report for that HXD utility. And we see the big red fail, so we know it has issues. And essentially, the issues are vulnerabilities. We've found 6 severe vulnerabilities, and we click on that, and we can see that the vulnerabilities are occurring here in the. Let's look at the patching mandated. Okay, so we've failed essentially because we have critical severity vulnerabilities, right? We have 3 9.8 vulnerabilities, right? And so we can investigate those and figure out what we need to do. We explain what the vulnerability is and when it was resolved, so that'll help with remediation, or at least following up with the vendor and saying, hey, do you have a new version of this that's safe, does it without vulnerabilities? And so we can see that we failed there. And then on the PuTTY, this one passed. So we see the green pass. We see one moderate or medium severity hardening issue, but nothing that failed our policy. Right. So in that case, we want to allow PuTTY to be deployed in our environment, but we don't want the HXD utility to be deployed. So now let me talk about the blocking feature. So I kind of illustrated that earlier with the diagram. this happens through the plugin that's been deployed to Artifactory. And essentially the plugin keys off this scan status property. If the scan status is fail, the plugin will block download. And that's what I want to demo now. So let's go over to Postman. So this is from Postman, I'm going to make a couple of API calls to Artifactory. And the API calls I'm going to make are to retrieve that artifact, essentially download that artifact from Artifactory. And first of all, and here's the API endpoint, and the parameters I'm sending is I'm targeting the vendor binaries repo, and the artifact that I want to download first is the putty win executable. So let me just go ahead and send this API request, and we got back at 200 OK. So this is downloading my binary, and I have not been blocked at all. So I've got access to the putty win executable. Now let's do the same thing for the HXD executable. So just change this and let's send that request. I got a 403. I got a 403 forbidden back. All right. So the plugin has returned a 403 response and also provided a message in the API response saying that download has been blocked due to a failed ReversingLabs assessment. I also have a link here right to the report. So if I'm getting that API HTTP response, I can go right to the report and figure out why it's failing, right? And so that's the blocking feature in action. And the blocking with integration can be enabled or disabled. It's optional. You might want to, when you first deploy the integration, not do blocking just to make sure everything is working the way you expect. But the blocking occurs only because, again, of this scan status fail that you see here, right? So that's the blocking feature and protecting your organization. Okay, now with that, let me go back to the container image scan. Okay, so our scan has finished. You notice we have build 42 in the list here that was not there before. And look at that, it failed. We have a big red threat here. Let's take a look at the safe report. Malware risk. So remember that strat malware, that remote access Trojan that I inserted in the container image? We've caught it, right? And we have failed that scan. And because of that, again, let's go look at the properties on that build 42. And yeah, so again, we have the fail. So if anyone tries to get access to that Docker image, basically retrieve it from Artifactory, the plugin is going to block it. So again, this is another case where in this case, the build artifact, the output of that pipeline that I just ran in Jenkins was infected. It was infected with that malware. And so this integration has been able to catch it, and not only that, stop the spread and from that being used. So hopefully that illustrates the two use cases there with the final build exam, and then also the third-party risk management use case. Okay, let me switch gears now. And what I want to do is talk about the third use case, which is the shift left. So we're gonna, again, go to Jenkins, and I have another Jenkins project called Strut Showcase Artifactory Pull. And so this is a Jenkins project that builds a Java web app called Strut Showcase. It's a web app that comes with the Struts framework, and it's obviously Java based. And I actually have that also in my repositories. Let me pull that up. Strut Showcase. There it is. And so this is my source repo where I'm going to build the WAR file, and it's pulling in a lot of open source libraries. And so you'll see that here in a minute. But what I want to show you first is how I've configured the Maven build to pull in open source libraries from Artifactory versus the public internet. All right, and that's done in Jenkins through a settings file right here. So essentially what you see here is the Maven settings.xml file. And this is what tells Maven where to pull in open source libraries. So just scroll down to the location. Here it is. All right. So essentially with Maven, you set up a mirror and you say, instead of pulling open source libraries from Maven Central on the internet, I want you to pull open source libraries from this location, which is our Artifactory instance. And specifically, currently I'm pulling open source libraries from this repo called Maven2 dev unscanned. All right, so let's go to Artifactory and take a look at that. This is a remote repo. And right here we see Maven2 dev unscanned. And then I have another sort of identical repo called Maven2 dev scanned. And so as you might expect, the only difference here is that in the unscanned repo, the Java libraries here, like let's take a look at this first one, this antler jar. We see we're not scanning it at all. And then the second one, we are scanning it. And that's actually the remote repo. With remote repos in Artifactory, it actually creates a cache because the remote repo is like a proxy between the Maven Central public repo and then the local repo in Artifactory. And so essentially the scanned has a parallel cache repo and also an equivalent unscanned cache repo. And so if we take a look at these, let's look at the antler jar here. See, we have no properties on this particular jar at all. And if we look at the scanned cache, same thing, we'll look at the jar again. And we do have properties. So very clearly you can see we have an unscanned repo where Spectra Assure is not being used, and then we have a scanned repo where Spectra Assure is being used. All right, now that kind of just sets the stage here. So what I want to do first is go ahead and do a build of this Strut Showcase app using the unscanned repo. So let me go back to the Strut Showcase Artifactory pull and do a build. This is going to be build number 45, kicking off here. And let me go ahead and let's show the console output. Okay, so the build is running. You can see that it's pulling in open source libraries, these jar files from our unscanned repo in Artifactory. And so it's running through the build now, building that WAR file. And it should be done here in a minute. And so this essentially this is the same as pulling in libraries from the open internet because nothing has been scanned with Spectra Assure. Okay, so we got a successful build, right? No problems at all. Green across the board for that pipeline run. Now I'm going to make a change to that settings file, and we're going to pull in libraries from that the scanned repo right here. So we're going to change this from unscanned to scanned, save that. And we're going to go back to the project and do another build. So the only thing that's changed here is that the build is pulling in scanned artifacts. So Spectra Assure has basically vetted or not vetted these. All right, and so we got failure. Okay, so we've broken the build. Why did we break the build? All right, let's scroll up just a little bit and we see here's the issue. We have an error, failed to execute goal on the project, could not resolve dependencies. The following artifacts could not be resolved. We see here it is. It's log4j core.jar 2.12.1 could not transfer. And here's that 403, right? So here's the blocking, the plugin in action. Again, we're sending that 403, not allowing a developer in their pipeline to download this unsafe open source jar. And so, as a developer, my build has failed. Why did it fail? Well, I have some clues here. Well, by checking Artifactory and looking at, what is it about this particular jar that failed, what I need to do is just find it here. And it's under org, Apache, logging, log4j core. And here's the jar that failed right here. Here's my RL properties. Again, we see the fail. Now here's a link right to the scan report. Right. So I don't have to do anything. I can just click on that link, which I've already opened right here. So here's that report, the Spectra Assure safe report for that log4j component. And we see it failed. The reason being is we have 2 patch mandated vulnerabilities in this package. So let's click on that and take a look at them. So they're patch mandated. Those are the ones that are failing. I don't necessarily need to address any other vulnerabilities, but it's the patching mandates that's causing the problem. And the 2 vulnerabilities are listed here. We have a 10.0 and a 9.0. So obviously everyone's familiar with this. This is log4shell vulnerability. And it's a 10.0 CVSS score. So the worst of the worst, right? And so we've prevented that build because we didn't want the developers pulling in this component. And we see that we're resolved in a 2.12.2. So developers then would know, okay, I got to upgrade to at least that version. Preferably they should upgrade to the latest version. But that's an illustration of kind of taking security, shifting left, failing a build in a pipeline, and keeping software safe by having developers not able to complete their build. So with that, that actually wraps up my demos. So just to kind of cover all the bases here, the integration is simply a Python script that interfaces to Artifactory and separately includes a plugin that is able to block access or download to dangerous binaries. There's option to run either locally with the CLI, like this command that you see here. Alternatively, you can scan with Portal, which is what I did here on the demo today. We scanned build 42 of that Java Hello World container. So both those options are available there. And then the third-party risk management use case where we scan those vendor binaries. That's another scenario that we went through today. So keep in mind that, I think primarily this integration is for software producers, especially making sure releases are safe from malware. And turn on my video again now that my demos are done. So hopefully, everyone got some value out of seeing these demos today. And with that, let me turn it back over to Jasmine and Joanna.
Okay, so we have a question that came in over the chat about controlling behavior through external policy management. I'm assuming what he means is that they have a policy management tool somewhere separate, and they're wondering how to connect that to Spectra Assure.
Yeah, so with the policy configuration in Spectra Assure, there's really kind of 2 main options. One is to use the safe levels that Jasmine mentioned earlier, where we've kind of set up within the product a crawl, walk, and run type of scenario where a level 1 is essentially, go back to Portal here. So here's the safe levels. A level 1 is essentially, the easiest to pass. In other words, only the worst of the worst issues are in level 1. So if you can't pass level 1, essentially you need to stop any releases or any builds. So these are kind of categories. You see 5 levels here, and those are kind of out of the box policies or groups of policies that we've set up. Beyond that, you can translate your external policies into very granular policies by going into the specific policies in Spectra Assure. We have, I think, almost 300 policy IDs that can be turned on or off as desired. So you don't have to use the levels. You can configure it pretty granularly on how you want to have your policy configured. I hope that, and then in the CLI, I should also mention that policies can be configured in a very granular way with the CLI currently. It's on the roadmap for the portal, but with CLI, you can actually configure, exclusions, and you can configure VEX statements for vulnerabilities. But you can say for this particular file or set of files, I want to ignore this policy. So you can get very granular with it, but I hope that answers the question. Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
it's kind of a mapping exercise, right?
one of the things I wanted to, I guess, reinforce is that the blocking doesn't have to happen. You choose whether to block or not. Right, Dave?
That is correct. So if we in the diagram that I'd showed earlier with kind of the nuts and bolts of how the integration works, the plugin, there's actually a properties file associated with that plugin, and that has some configuration settings. One of the configuration settings is whether or not you want to block or not block. So you can kind of enable or disable the blocking feature. And there's a few other things in that properties file that allows you to configure the plugin the way you want it. For example, you may want to only block from certain repos. Like you can turn on blocking sort of conditionally. Like I want to block download if it occurs in this repo, but not in this if it occurs in this repo. So there's some configuration that you can do there.
Okay. Any other questions for Dave? Someone has raised their hand. All right. Let's look at that.
No more questions?
I'm trying to unmute someone. Crystal?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Perfect, Dave. Thank you so much for the great demo. And I just have a quick question from RBC. So we do have Artifactory. However, how do you compare this with X-Ray? I do believe X-Ray has a binary scan as well. So what is the biggest, I would say, comparison or advantage? If
Yeah,
you don't mind.
sure. Good question, Crystal. Thanks. So X-Ray is kind of JFrog's offering or a SCA product essentially built into Artifactory. So it focuses on CVEs only, and it typically is, well, it really looks at open source libraries alone. So in other words, these two binaries that we're looking at, for example, these executables, these Windows binaries, X-Ray can't tell you anything about those. It can't unpack and do the analysis of binaries like Spectra Assure can. I think X-Ray is helpful when it comes into vulnerabilities and open source libraries. I've heard mixed things about the efficacy of it and whether it does a good job or not. But it comes with Artifactory. So maybe it's something you get what you pay for there. But the biggest difference is that Spectra Assure can handle over 4,000 different file formats, including all sorts of binaries, Windows, Linux, any type of unpacking that needs to be done to tear apart a binary, figure out what's in it. That's what we specialize in. whereas X-ray is more about detecting vulnerabilities in open source components. I hope that helps.
It looks like you're getting a thumbs up there.
Okay,
So,
great.
good. Okay, any more questions, folks? This is your last chance. We're going to disappear soon if you don't ask them now.
Oh, we'll be around for questions later. Come on.
No, seriously, if you have other questions, you can always get in contact with us and we can follow up later.
Do you need me to stop sharing, John?
Let's see. It's telling me I'm not sharing. Don't know. Okay. Well, let's see. I think that's it for us today. Thank you all for your time and attention. Hope to see you again soon in another webinar. Let's see, I have some resources for you. I'm supposed to share here.
Need me to pull that up, Jasmine? I have it.
I think I have it. I just need
Okay.
to get it in the presentation mode. All right. So if you want to read a blog, a technical blog that Dave wrote, spent a lot of time on, you can go to our blog and see it. It's Spectra Assure Artifactory, Integration, Securing Software Development. The link to the Spectra Assure community that I was talking about earlier, where we have all these report summaries on your packages from npm, PyPy, and so on. It's available at secure.software. There are also some upcoming events that you might be interested in. For those of you who might be using VirusTotal or know colleagues that are, you can check out our Share Next Wednesday's webinar about a powerful alternative to VirusTotal. Then you can also follow what's newly published from our 2025 Software Supply Chain Security Report from us. Our colleagues will be also talking about that and discuss the key findings. And if your organization is doing business in Europe, you wouldn't want to miss our April 10th webinar with former leader of ISA to discuss the emerging EU regulations and how they relate to third-party risk management and software supply chain security. Okay. With that, I think I will let everyone go. Good day. Thanks all.
Thanks all.